Hi, I'm Kelsey, and my project is on bad news in the media. Okay. Nobody likes to hear bad news. Bad news is a complete downer at any time of the day. Today in society, bad news infiltrates every area of the news. From the shootings to the thunderstorms, the media covers it all. Can you ever imagine a time that you've watched the news and heard all positive news? Probably not, but most news tends to have a common theme of negativity. In all forms of media, news, television, books, magazines, bad news seems to be the form of the majority of news that is covered. War, violent acts of terror, robberies, rapes, shootings, natural disasters. I grabbed your attention, didn't I? See, we've all learned and developed a pattern of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness means that we focus so heavily on negative news. We are already conditioned for the bad news and thrive off of hearing it, causing us to be exceedingly emotional and depressed. Obviously, this is not healthy, which is confusing knowing that most of the news is covered with negative thoughts, ideas, and coverage. The news is all about ratings and views. Like a television show or movie, news stations also need the ratings to stay alive. And while bad news is what draws people in and grabs people's attention, this is what the news television stations go for. As strange as it may seem, our brains tend to gravitate towards negative things versus positive ones. Somehow, we are just more sensitive to negative ideas, and news productions have caught on to this and have taken ownership of causing their ratings to rise. News reports of theft, rape, death, and random stories in the neighborhoods seem to be the main topic in local news. News reporters seem to enjoy going into low-income areas to cover these stories, causing for either a viewer's heart to break for the victim or cause discriminatory feelings towards different races and classes of people. Another area in which bad news is covered is in relation to the war overseas or what our government is involved with. The news doesn't cover positive news when talking about the news as to soldiers coming home and visiting families, but even then, emotions are still running high. From deaths to emotional goodbyes, our negative wired minds are triggered and being upset starts to sink in. We tend to have flashbulb memory if we are present within a scene filled with something exciting or negative. Flashbulb memory is a distinct vivid memory that one has after witnessing an account that was very impacting to that person. A study done on flashbulb memory indicated that we tend to have flashbulb memory when viewing negative events. However, if not present, we don't necessarily have flashbulb memory. It tends to fade after 6 months. The way in which people receive information is very different. Some people go to the mum effect, which is where people are reluctant towards bad news. Some people can fight it, but others can't and are able to handle how news is delivered. Okay. Just because our minds are wired to be in tune towards negativity doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't think this way or that it is healthy for us. In fact, the way that news is presented to us can make all the difference in the world when it comes to how our bodies handle stress and bad news. It's all about the approaches you take to delivering negative news. According to Janice Morse, author of the journal Hearing Bad News, you can block, buffer, or counter the news. They're all pretty self-explanatory, but blocking shuts everything out, so you avoid any bad news altogether. Buffering is a slow technique and of telling someone slowly. That way they are able to come hear it gently versus all at once. Thirdly, countering bad news also allows for them to take control of the way they make a sound without you telling them that it is bad news. Media obviously focuses their attention on bad news versus the good news, and through this, research shows that bad news isn't necessarily good for a person determining how the news was presented to them. Something more important to remember when delivering bad news is the environment is important. Surprisingly, effective environments improve complex solving performance. Based on different motivational states, some people may be more emotional than others, and it is important to remember this when delivering bad news. You wouldn't want to deliver it in the wrong way. People generally don't want to be the one to give bad news. People actually shy away from doing so and would rather not be associated with bad news at all. Self-concern is a huge factor when dealing with bad news. People would rather be known and associated with good rather than bad. It is not easily delivering bad news, and this affects many reporters in a negative way. In this part of my presentation, I'll be sharing a story about a news reporter who has dealt with negativity in her life, and this is one slide, and then I have two slides that are dedicated to that. So now I'm on slide 17. Situational and personal experiences also play into environments and how those affect one's CSP performance. External affective cues also influence CSP process and have an impact on the outcome of the environment as well. Media obviously focuses their attention on bad news versus the good news, and through this research, that bad news isn't necessarily good for a person determining on how the news was presented to them. For the future, news corporations, magazines, newspapers, and all sources of media that covers news should think about the ways they report their bad news. It is understandable that this keeps the news stations going because of the ratings, but the way in which news is delivered can be so much improved. We don't have to accept the fact that we ourselves think negatively. We can overcome the depression and sadness in our world today. Prayer, meditation, massages, and even drinking a cup of hot tea. Yes, these are all ways in calming your mind and getting focused on what is important in life. Yes, we are affected by bad news. There is no way around it. However, we can choose to be positive. Even though it's difficult, try and shut out the negative messages thrown at you by the media and be happy.